Good evening to all of you. I am Ram Kumar from Institute of Internal Auditors. Happy welcoming all of you to this program on Introduction to Agile Internal Audit. As a precursor to the presentation which is going to be made by Mr. Vetrivelan, I would like to make some initial remarks with regard to the subject which we are going to discuss. I can tell you that the internal audit as a function is in the cusp of transformation. Gone are the days when we have a rigid audit plan, annual audit plan or a multi-year audit plan to do things in a conventional way. Management's expectations from internal audit function as such has undergone a lot of changes. They want this function to be something which is adding value. It's no longer a accounting review or compliance checking kind of a function, because each and every function in the company is expected to add value. If there is a function which doesn't add value, will not command respect. Second is, anything that we do will have to give a strategic direction to the business. Now, if you have to add value or help contribute to the strategic direction of the business, there is a compelling need for the function to position itself to respond to changing business needs, so that accordingly they will be able to alter their way they conduct the program, change the mindset, and look for opportunities which will significantly add value to the business. Through this process, the way the management, the company, and the rest of the functions see internal audit function also changes. So you will be like any other function, the value that is added by the internal audit function as it is, whether it is done within the organization or outsourced, either way, the value can be quantified. So that's a very important thing. So this is agile internal audit from that point of view is extremely important and needs to be embraced as it is by all the functions, all the internal audit groups of various companies. Now, to take us through this concept and give us an overview of what can be done through agile internal audit, so that all of us can adapt it to suit to our own requirements. We have Mr. Vetrivelan from Deloitte. Mr. Vetrivelan is a chartered accountant and a certified Scrum Master. He is a director with risk advisory practice of Deloitte, India. He has 14 years of experience in internal audit, 3 lines of defense, digital internal audit, agile internal audit, contract compliance and cost recovery, strategic cost reduction exercise, supplier rationalization review, risk assessment as per regulatory requirements, controls assessment review between countries, and GICs serving mainly for banking and financial services. He spent significant time working outside India for various projects for various FS clients. More specialization on digital internal audit and agile internal audit. Vetrivelan is also a national trainer for Deloitte, and he has conducted various programs on internal and external and on various topics. So I know Vetri is a bright spot, okay, and I'm sure he will be able to give us a very good insight about the topic on hand, both from an Indian perspective as well as from a global perspective as to what's happening. And I look forward to a very insightful presentation and a very productive session. All the best, Vetri. It's now over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramsas, for the brief introductions, and good evening to everyone. And thanks, IIA Madras chapter, for having me to share some insights around Agile internal audit. And most of them been hearing this Agile post-pandemic. That's the prominence has been picked up, and how Agile internal audit can come, how internal audit can be more agile. And this topic has been happening around with all the audit committees, CXOs level, and chief audit executives or head of audits, right? So Agile internal audit is not the new term because it's been in the practice from 2018 onwards or before pandemic from the global perspective. And it's been very well established when 2018 onwards it started, and right now it's there. So some sense of maturity is being arrived on the Agile internal audit also. From the Indian context, yes, the company started looking this very seriously during the pandemics and the times and the post-pandemic times, how my internal audit functions can be more agile and what kind of transformations can be happen, right? And what we're going to do in the next couple of hours to cover what is agile internal audit and its methodology. Basically, this agile internal audit talks more on the methodology sides rather than your tools and technologies and how the exhibitions happen. And what's the difference between the traditional or we call the waterfall method of internal audit methods, which we adopted over the decades? And that's what we're going to cover in bits and pieces of it. Then also we're going to cover in terms of three segments, what's the key differences in the planning stage and it comparative your traditional versus agile mechanisms, and also in terms of how the fieldwork or execution stage, what are the changes comes in the agile internal audit. That's the second segment we're going to pick it up. And the most important on the reporting side, that's the differentiations where we're going to talk about it, and that's where I can able to share the insights around it. And to make a precursor on this, already the answer is highlighted in terms of what's the importance of agile, what's the organization looking at. Agile internal is slightly heavy topic, which can't be done in 2 hours because it has lots of terms and concepts around it, and it's a full-fledged programs which will generally happen in any organization to understand how the and practice of it, right? So what we're going to do is we'll touch upon the terms and concept of what's about, and we'll try to practically how it works and all to absorb your concepts and the terms. That's the whole hint. And to best of it, we just try to cover in this holistically on this. And as just bit of housekeeping, we'll keep your Q&As and all your question and answers at the end of the last 15 minutes. That's where, and you can put your questions in the chat window also, so that it makes some kind of questions we can try to pick it up and try to answer in the last 15 minutes. And what I'll just move on to the next slide. So if you start about in terms of if you want to rewind or relook in terms of how internal audit journey started, how it's been transformed over the decades, right? And if we relook ourselves, right? So the birth of your modern internal audit with the establishment of IIA, right? The Institute of Internal Auditors, this was established in 1941, largely focused on your transactions and also more in terms of your process angles. That's where it started when we do internal audits. And over the decades, then there's a 1992, if you can relook, then there's a course of integrated control framework was came up, which specific focus on the more on the risk and controls angle. Then in 2002, where the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was came, right? It's specifically due to the some of the scandals being happened in the US, where a lot of your financial statement controls has been compromised. And that's where this act was rolled out to ensure how we can take care of that SOX related aspects in the financial statement. Then if you look that the journey is more of in terms of your IT internal audit. When we say IT internal audit, because largely the focus is more on your IT infrastructures, because as we move around, the ERPs who are coming to play, a lot of applications are in the place, because largely the volume of transactions got recorded. So there are heavily dependency on the IT sides. And then that's what we need to shift our gear more from your process and the transaction angles in terms of how the IT or application works in terms of your logics and the automated controls in the place. And that's where the IT internal audit was coming to play. And then as we move on, the needle and the gear has been moving towards the data analytics, because again, there's a large volume of data and the transaction becomes the landscape of the processes and geographic of business print has been expanded. Hence, this data analytics is also getting popular because of your need a greater amount of assurance or the comfort from the internal auditors. And where we do traditionally in terms of a random sampling, and that's where it moves towards data analytics is coming in important in the overall scheme of internal audit world. Then there is a shift again towards integrated audit because the business model has been expanded and there's a geographies of multi-geography, multi-regions, and multi-countries involved in the organization standpoint. And hence we need to, the process got diverse and the transaction got diverse. There's a element of your front office, back office are coming to the in the business model. Hence, there's a audits has been doing in the silos, so they need to get the integrated view, and that then there's a prominence on integrated audits and the subject matter experts support is required because more specialization requires because of the complexity of a business models has been emerging, right? And that's where this integrated audits and SME supports towards getting into the game. Then if you move on, then there's a cyber element or the angle was started because of largely the lot of digitalizations happened and you have that outside internet world is being connected towards the cloud. So many things has been happening on your IT side and there's a cyber risk. So that's more getting into the picture in terms of your how you can add value towards your organization by the internal auditors. Then in 2018, where the Agile internal audit was came, if you look this in terms of why Agile internal audit was picked up or why it's been coming in towards us, over the decades, there has been a lot of transformations or changes in your landscape of business models and the digitalizations and automations been happening. Fundamentally, the methodology has not been relooked in the way it has been started, right? So there is a big ask or the expectations from your stakeholders, being your clients, if you're working in the capacity of a consulting or an advisory, or being your in-house stakeholder because you're handling your in-house stakeholders because you are representing as an in-house central audit team. So those expectations are coming in terms of the time durations which took an audit and the collaborations, and it takes a time. So to fix all those things, there needs to be a significant relook of methodology. And that's one of the thought process where this agile internal audit was came in 2018 with a lot of proof of concept by a lot of players in the market. And even including IA was come up with the white papers and thought papers of how the agile internal audit has to be structured, how the methodology looks like, what framework has to come, how it has to be transformed into the ground level, all those things. In a summary, if you look towards the background, if we want to relook at the current challenges in the two perspectives, one from the client angle or your customers or end user stakeholders of it, because a lot of pain points has been triggered, right? Most of you been hearing this, like the time taken to issue a report, it goes in multiple weeks, sometimes months. It's case to case basis. On average, 8 to 12 weeks or 14 weeks on a typically a normal scope of work which we do. That's one of the challenges we've been hearing from the business stakeholders. That's where, because they've been telling my internal team it takes a lot of time to issue a report. They've been put in the dark or surprise. We don't know what's happening on it. So that's kind of feedback or the expectations been coming from your client side or your business stakeholder side. And second contention was more in terms of my IA folks doesn't aware of my businesses or regulations or recent change in my process landscape. And that's a second contention on hearing from many of your folks of your client side or your business stakeholders, because that's one of the most common expectations there, because what level of awareness they have, what level of awareness from the regulatory angle, and what are the recent changes happen in my business world, is they aware, they factor in their internal audit plan, or they factor in their internal audit scope. Those are the questions get popped up in the business stakeholder or the client side angle is there. And the lastly, which Ram sir also mentioned about the value. The value addition is one of the expected from internal auditors, because what are the relevant value addition points they put on the table in the audit committees or the board or the respective boards which they carry or represent. And that's where the big questions, the three contentions was the background for us to relook the methodology so that it can reduce the eliminated some kind of waste of time or the loss of efforts which is not required, and where we need to focus, where we not required to focus more, or we need to less focus. That's all about this. Ajay is going to teach or thought about us. The next important perspective, if you look, because we saw one side of a table about the clients and the business stakeholder. The second side of our table, it's more about the internal audit professionals or your internal audit fraternity, right? They also pass through some of the pain points. If you look, right, uh, uh, for example, too many informations are flowing at the same time because they have a pressure to release the report at some point of time, right? If you look, the business might not give some information, but they might give all the dump of information at one single point of time, which you're closer to audit committee or closer to a report release date, right? And that's a big challenges or the problem statement which your IA professionals has been keep on hearing or keep on shout out to everyone, right? And that's one of your contentions. So how we can fix that? That's from your fraternity angle. That's we should look at. And the next important aspect in terms of prioritization. So which one I should prioritize, which one I should keep less prioritization. That's a big challenging statements going within the fraternity, right? And next important aspects, you might have acknowledged that the time taken to finalize the report is huge amount of time. Because if you look on average, 30 to 40% of your times in the overall audit time planning, right? It's supposed to only the finalization of report. And that's a big challenges because what we do planning, what we do execution, what we do report within the three angle, if you look, the time which we took for the finalizing the report is huge. A lot of iterations, a lot of pushbacks, a lot of changes in the responses, changes in your observations. So all those causes a lot of time because that's ultimately where you face off your business from the stakeholders point of view, or you're going to face off your clients. So these two perspectives put across, right? This is the real problem statements which we've been hearing, right? So all this is going to be fixed in the Agile internal audit methodology. That's where we're going to talk about in bit of detail in more in upcoming slides. Roshan, just move on. Next slide. So before we get into Agile internal audit, right, we should understand in terms of what is Agile. And because we've been talking on this in the quite while, because many audience or internal or external people, they look internal audit function as more in terms of your value addition, because they are the final gatekeepers of the organization to ensure that they catch hold of any regulatory issues or your operational revenue leakage or financial issues. That's the expectations of your CXOs or CEOs or the board members or audit committees. So that's what in the opening context where Ram sir mentioned about, but how early we're giving some warning signals. So how we are giving some impactful or relevant in the board or the table. And these are the some key strong bold statements are there, so that makes us to be more relevant in the organizations as a stakeholder or a partnership person within the organization, right? And to break that down in terms of, we need to change the mindset, right? So when we look the mindset, because if you look Agile is more about the way we are thinking, and the more on the mindset change is required, because principally this aims to reduce the cost or the time and improve the quality of the work products or the outcomes, right? That's the simple terms if I want to translate, and that's all about Agile. In legacy, the Agile term was largely used in the software development. If you look last 20, 30 years ago, when the software developers been using their overall developing any work products or output for the customers, they come up with the Agile mechanisms, the Scrum and etc. in place. So they have a structured, systematic approach so that all the changes which is the customer induces get tracked and it's get translated into their work product. And that's where this software developer has been using this one. And if you put across the simple of a lot of practices in the world has been happening. You've been hearing the term called Scrum. We've been hearing the term called Lean. We've been hearing this term called Carbon. These are all a family of practices, if you ask me in a simple word. Scrum is coming with a term called feature driven. That's the way it's been there. And the Carbon is more about dynamics, which they focus in the methodology in terms of what dynamics are there within the work product development. And the Lean comes with the concept of your reduction of activities or non-value added items in the overall scheme of a projects or the model which they develop. This is a kind of a family of practice happening in the world. When you ask what Agile Intelligence picked up, they picked up the concept of Scrum. That's been globally widely accepted and it's been in the practice in the quite while. And that's the framework or Scrum is background which has been used to develop our Agile internal audit methodology. That's the whole background behind this. And if you want to put across some of the values of what Agile has been focusing, that's important to know as a fundamentals, then we can correlate as we move around in terms of what's a methodology, what's a life cycle, what's the do's and don'ts, how it has to be translated, everything we can appreciate it. Largely, when the software development has happened, right, they have the value streams, because any kind of a methodology or concept, it has to correlate to the value. So the value streams is morely about, if you see the left side of it, that's the value stream which Agile is focusing. The right side of it's more of a green, is what legacy most of them been focusing on the ground. Because in Agile mechanism, they focus more on the value of that individuals and interactions, because that gives a greater comfort and assurance, because that's where you can easily get out of the maximum benefit out of you doing the individual interaction, because mostly the people driven, because they know that what has to be developed, right, rather than the process and the tools. So that's a more important value stream. It's been coming up. And the second value stream is more in terms of your working software, because rather than your documentations, because in Agile, they're focusing more on the final output and the final outcome, and rather than more on the comprehensive documentation maintaining it, but what's the outcome is coming out of it, and what's going to be relevant to me to take a meaningful decision, or what's relevant to us to take some improving the organizations for improving some output or the features of the product which we use. So that's where it's been there. And the third important aspect is more in terms of customer collaborations, because if you look from the most of your Agile mechanism is the customer collaboration is an important angle or aspects which the value stream is comes rather than the negotiations. If you look at the legacy in the software development side, where they focus on what is the scope of work, they simply apply the scope of work and try to develop a final output or product and give it to the customers for the product. Whereas in the Agile mechanism, if they change this, the game which I've been driving is the customer collaboration, that each iteration which the customer experienced has been factored in, so that the quotient, happy quotient of the customers become more important, right? And that's also, it applies to our world, because we are also servicing to the end customers, to the organizations or the businesses. So we are also have a customer quotients to be looked after in detail. And that's where the principles applies to us in largely also. And the last is important is responding to the change, right? If you look the change, because or rather than following a plan, because if you look in the software development side or in our legacy, they strictly follow the plan. It's a straight line where they focus in terms of whether in line with my plan, all items has been checked and followed it right. More important is if there is more agile or more changes happening, how we are adaptable or towards that, and how we able to respond towards the change, so that we don't miss out anything. The change is happening in the business world, or the scheme of the landscape of the organizations is not missed out. That's the core value streams is more important while we look at it in terms of agile. And this is an important element as a fundamentally the agile mechanism was being translated into the methodology into the practices, right? And that's where I just want to highlight in terms of what's happening. If you move on to next slide. Yeah. We bits and pieces we talk about in terms of the background of agile, why it's been created, how it's going to be relevant and included. So being in agile, there's some scientific research or the feedback has been obtained, right? So there's a top side, you can see some 3 diagrams, which is a pain points, right? If we use the agile methodology and the waterfall methodology, which is a traditional, the way which we do, right? What has been translated or we've been able to determine is the productivity important aspect. Because if they go for agile mechanism, the productivity quotient is more higher, and the number of hours taken to deliver the outcome and output is also reduced compared to your waterfall. Because there's a clear time box activity, there's a clear prioritizations been happening in the agile, and there's a clear stakeholder agreement or collaboration is happening. So 3 important aspects which cause the delay makes us to be using the agile. That's one of a pain point we just want to tell. And the second is more about your multiple item focus. Traditionally, we look, one might do a multiple project, or they might do a multiple audits parallelly, which cause a delay or which cause the focus has been reduced, although there's a loss of effort has been happened. So agile comes with very clearly one at a time. It's not your multiple items taken on the ground, and so that there's a focus level has been drastically reduced. If they do one project, it's 100%. If they do 2 projects, 50-50 goes. It's a human phenomenon which generally applies, right? If they do 3 or 4 at the time, then the focus goes equally distributed, right? So Agile as comes this pain point to fix it because that's the biggest pain point has been determined or feedback has been received around the world. Then there's a teaming stage, which is most important aspect if you go, because that's causing, because it's a people-driven business, it's a people-dependent business, or the way we are doing. It's not a machine or tools going to work internal audit or to make some decisions or that make some recommendations towards that, how they change the process, how they change the issues and etc. Right. So largely there's a 4 stages. That's where I just want to share some perspective. There's a Bruce Tuckman who created that the model for the teaming stages. One is performing, the second is transforming, and third is norming, and the last is a performing team, right? So norming team is largely you might have a new entrance in your team. So they largely depended on you because they know what to do, and they need a sense of directions for them towards to move and to take some decisions or to progress it. So those people will have some amount of directions because they know someone is guiding them through that. There's a amount of productivity, but not large to the extent of your performing team. If you look at the storming teaming stage, right? The storming is where largely there's a set of people where you need to do a push. Unless you push, things will not move. Whereas the first stage, if you give a direction, things will move faster. The storming team is the most dangerous in any kind of methodology. Being a waterfall, being an agile, it's not going to be successful. So teaming stage is very important, where your team stands and which component of teams is standing around. So you need to see is if it's a storming, the product obviously it's declining, irrespective of which method it's going to affect. Then if it's a normal team where they have a sense of maturity, they know what to do, etc. And performing team is outstanding team. Obviously, they are SMEs across functional experience, multi-skill set people. So obviously, without any sense of direction, without any push, they automatically do themselves as a Kickstarter or a self-starter rather than as a right word to move on towards that. So these pain points is the key. Three pillars important in the Agile framework. It has to be fixed. So how it can be fixed is go with the small and limit your work in progress, listen to the feedback. Listen to the feedback. The feedback can be your internal within your team or the feedback from the customers or the end user, the business stakeholder. Because there's a other side of the mirror who knows what's happening, where we feel it's right, everything. And that's where this Agile have a 3 fundamental, while in their overall framework, they'll do one at a time. There's no multitasking, but there's a customer collaborations. So these are the 3 simple words I just want to mention, so that we are fundamentally ingrained that Agile concept before we jump into the methodology level. Question just more. So far we looked Agile. Now we get into Agile into lot, right? I just touched upon in terms of Agile, how the angle of interlodic was corresponding. We have the same problem statements so that we know that where we also need to correct it or do some kind of a course corrections. So if you look in terms of Agile interlodic overview, right? Why we need to bring Agile to interlodic, right? That's the question where everyone started looking, because we also have some kind of a 3 fragmented statements which we make is better, faster, and happier. If you ask this better, yes, of course, we also have some kind of a problem statements, which is we need to have better value to a user, we need a better quality, we need a better team performance and the decision making, which we are lagging, which needs to be addressed. That's what we need to bring that Agile framework or mechanisms or the concepts towards our interlodic world. Then the faster, if you take that quotient, the faster is obviously required because the time taken to issue a report or the time taken to make some productivity or adaptations, which is it's take a lot of times, needs to move faster on the wheel so that you can quickly catch the bus or the train so that you can able to deliver much faster. And the last question, if you take it up, is more happier. If you take that question, there's obviously two side of it. One is your end user stakeholders, your client side, and the other side your own teams and individual, right? If you need to look that after end of audit, whether the Apple quotient is high or low, that's obviously debatable. Most of the cases is low because they may not because they're not able to tell the point to the customers. They know there's a kind of a disagreement, or they might come back and say that the way we look is not right, or it has to be changed. So the appeal quotient is very important. That's the biggest play in the overall scheme of your interactions with your customers and the clients and the business stakeholders, right? And appeal needs to be fixed. That's why we are focused on the appeal quotient also. And what is Agile internal audit? If you want to put very simple without any definition, it's a very collaborative approach where audit team and the business stakeholders are going to work together. And it's an iterative time box approach and value driven outcome or audits. That's all in a simple word I want to communicate. Because collaboration is happening where you are taking your business on the collaboratively and working towards the objective of the organization, because you're not working silo for some other purpose for the organization, for the same stakeholder where you're going to bring some value. And it's more about time box approach, which we saw in the past, the time taken for conclusions towards audits too longer. So that can reduce it so that you are also have a focused and prioritizations happen. And the business also knows the outcome of the team, which is been doing in internal audit function, what is the relevant or the value they're given. And finally, it's a value for the relevant within the table. That's where they look. So that's where all the components of what we spoke about is the Agile internal audit and when to use this Agile internal audit. So this Agile internal audit cannot be applied across the board. It has some elements. If you feel largely time-consuming audit, if any audits takes 20 weeks or 24 weeks or 18 weeks, then there's a significant question has to be done within internally as a self-introspection. What's really costing them? Whether we can try to use Agile, it can reduce the timelines. That's one area where you need to use this Agile internal audit. And the largely data analytics potentials is there, because your data analytics or digital internal audit will work in terms of feeding your information to take a decision. Whereas my overall architecture of this entire model needs to the enablers and the tools are just going to ease your operations in terms of getting the exceptions. Whereas on top of it, your overall process and methodology needs to be done. That's where a combination of data analytics and Agile will be a more successful model. And that's where we should look at it. And there's a huge amount of manual records or 100% audit Agile internal audit doesn't. So I want to give a caution here. If there's too much of manual records where your level of digitalization and automation is very less, and all the papers, environmental Agile might not help you going to have the same amount of time to do an audit. And similarly, if it's in 100% audit, it's where your team has to give a greater comfort. It might workable if you're having like a CCM solution or completely exception dashboards in the play, then you might use Agile and audit. But if there is no that kind of architecture within your business or your clients, then it doesn't work very well on the Agile world. So this is an Agile internal audit in an overview. And if you move on, question. A quick comparison between the traditional versus Agile internal audit, right? I just want to quickly give it differences. Some might have been experiencing or some might be practicing for the benefit of someone new to Agile internal audit. I want to show the comparison, what all about this. If you see the top side, it has your traditional internal audit. If you look the common phases which we pass through is planning, fieldwork, review, reporting. That's the 4 phases we generally take. And the time taken for this internal audit generally starts with 8 weeks and goes to 16 weeks, sometimes X number of weeks, we don't know. And it has a valid or genuine reasons why it's causing a delay. Might be dependency, might be some internal challenges, might be some other issues which you are completely wrong in the way it's been executed. So the number of weeks is a question mark. What is the concerns which they have is, if we adopt, it takes a time and resources effectively, or as a big question has been happened because what we planned might not be able to execute because the planning went wrong, or the expectations from the client or business taken something different which you not factor in your plan, or the field of execution, the methodology, it's completely missed out what you planned because there's amount of your exhibiting, the people might have changed, or some other reasons can cause you delay. And the review mechanisms which might be doing is also some kind of a troubles. So there's a general consensus in the traditional approach. They might have put across some methodology or trackers or Excel sheet, some internal audit tool, but ultimately, we have a big dependency with the business or the clients, which you have to get the relevant information or the processes. Based on that, you're able to conclude it, but there's a cause of delays happening. So in Agile Internal Audit, how it works is, this is a sprint model. When I say sprint, it's a time box approach. Each sprint does not cross more than 2 weeks. A minimum is 1 week, a maximum is 2 weeks. Within the sprint, you have a 3 phases, generally planning, fieldwork, review. Whereas in the traditional, the overall in the scope of work, we have 4 phases. Whereas in the sprint mechanism, each sprint, the plan has to be decided, the fieldwork has to be executed within the 2 weeks, and the review and output has to complete it within the 2 weeks. So you might have seen some words of POV. It's a point of view, that's an output or outcome which should come out of the sprint. Whereas in our earlier phases or the traditional waterfall method, we will issue a report, might be at the end of the audit, or we might issue some kind of a gap tracker, but it's not a full-fledged, clear agreement happen with the business, because your gap tracker just given exceptions, might agreeing or disagreement might happen. So it might don't know whether it's finally concluded. So the time taken for your gap tracker to final report, it goes multiple weeks. That's the where we lose the control of the engagement of the project, right? Whereas in the agile mechanisms, it's clearly a 2 weeks approach, or 2 weeks time box. The clock starts here and the clock has to end by 2 weeks. And within the 2 weeks, you have to release the report, or report means not all. It has some element which will talk about what is POV, what has to be covered, what not has to be covered. So that's a high level difference. We just want to make sure what is waterfall method, what is your agile mechanisms. So it has a structure, it has some method of madness towards that. One. So this is your overall agile internal audit life cycles. Some of might have familiar, some might have a new year. So there is a 4 roles, there's a 4 events and 5 artifacts. In traditional internal audit, we might have a kickoff meeting, we might have your initial data request, we might have every like planning meetings, we might have process walkthrough, etc. So I'll tell about something on agile internal audit where there's a clear role has been defined, who has to do what, and there's an event has been clearly articulated. Within that event, someone has to play the critical role, someone has to play what is the role expectations. And the 5 artifacts is the artifacts are the outcome for this particular internal audit life cycle, agile internal audit life cycles. So if you look the term on the top side, there's the 4 roles are there. Basically 4 roles of the color red. The first one is the stakeholders, obviously or the business stakeholders. So there's a term called the Scrum team. If I want to correlate the Scrum team against our existing legacy practices, it's nothing of your project team or engagement team who's working on that particular projects or audits. And the next is audit champion. If you ask audit champion, if you want to correlate in practical terms, audit champion, the purpose is more a strategic decision maker or more of relations person or advocacy person. It's if you ask the legacy term, it's more of your partners or directors from your chief audit executives, if you have in-house team, and your audit leaders. That's the we call as an audit champion. Then there's a product owners is one term. A product owners, the role expectations is that person has to give directions and the visions for the team. And basically they have to translate the stakeholders' expectations or needs to the Scrum team. Basically, that's the role played by the product owner, because product owners is the ultimate product owner is going to deliver the product to the stakeholders. And where the audit champion is also to acknowledge the fact of the product which has been delivered. Right? If you ask the legacy terms in a waterfall, it's your project managers or engagement managers. That's where your product owners' roles has been played. And one important role is coming in this overall agile internal audits is a Scrum Master. That's the person where in legacy we might call as a team leader or a servant leader. Here in the Scrum Master, that person should not be part of your projects. Basically, that person has to ensure all the impediments faced by the Scrum team or the project team has to be fixed, and he or she will be there in the overall this entire sprint or entire agile internal audit. So to make sure that the team able to move faster and without any impediments, that's the role of a Scrum Master going to be played. And stakeholders, obviously, you guys are familiar on the clients. And this is a 4 roles which we generally follow in the agile internal audits. And if you ask into 4 events, which we're talking about, right, you can see the entire pictorial diagram. There's something called sprint planning. The sprint planning is important event, which you plan how many sprint I have to do for this audit. And it can be 5, 6, or 10, depends on that, the expectation of the scope of work and etc. everything. Then there's something called daily scrum. Daily scrum is kind of a daily stand-up meeting. The scrum team and the scrum masters, product owners might have discussed in terms of what have they done yesterday, what they're planning to do today, and what's a kind of impediments they're facing to do whatever they planned for the sprint. That's been generally happening in the daily scrum. That's why one of event is very critical. And a sprint review. Sprint review is nothing about, there's a 4 or 5 parties to be involved in the sprint review. At end of each sprint, might be first week or end of second week, whatever you plan for the sprint, you have to go and present your point of view. For example, if you want to pick up one sprint in terms of access review, I'm going to pick it up because I don't want to release the term right now, because there's something called a user story, there's something called epic, something called a feature, then there's a POE is coming to picture. So the sprint review is nothing about your stakeholders, the scrum team and audit champion and the product owners gang up together, and they presented 2 or 3 POEs, and the POEs has to be agreed and accepted by the stakeholder on the same meeting. So there is no excuse in terms of, okay, I'll get back with your responses so and so later. So that's where the time frame given to your business and the stakeholders is they have to well prepare, because these are the sprint I'm focusing, and it's going to be the outcome is going to come. So maximum within the same day they have to come if they want to take some consensus or opinion from their leadership team. But it's within the 2 weeks the activity has to come, so that from your internal fraternity or professional you've been chasing for the responses, that can be eliminated in the sprint review. That's one of the things we just want to share. And there's one more event we want to discuss about is sprint retrospective. We might do in the legacy audit some kind of internally we catch up what we did in this audit, what went wrong, etc. Whereas in the agile internal audit world, there's a mandatory event where there's a sprint retrospective should be happened, where the scrum master has to ensure this event is taken place. Here, generally the people talk about what I like, what I lack in this audit or in the sprint or this project, and what I need to hope for to achieve it. That's what in the sprint retrospective we will cover up in detail what is the expectation, how it has to be done. And if you look at 5 artifacts which we need to cover, right? One is the project audit canvas. It's kind of a one briefing document needs to be created. Then there's a story mapping or initial backlog. Story mapping and initial audit backlog is nothing about your consolidated target items, which needs to be done for this particular project or the audit, right? You might have 20, 30 items, which translated into multiple sprints. So that's where, when I do a project audit canvas, outcome of that, I know what are the items I need to focus. I'll show some pictorial diagram, how the project audit canvas and your story mapping or initial backlog looks like. So just try to keep that term open so that you can absorb something on what is backlog, initial audit backlog looks like. And then sprint POV. Obviously, we covered the POV is nothing about your 2 or 3 points, a kind of a simple point of view document has been released to the stakeholders for the acceptance, etc. Right? Your internal audit report, final report remains the same. What we are changing in the new world or agile world is all your final report pointers are get diluted. 1 or 2 points get being translated as a POV to the customers or the clients, so that they're able to digest and they're able to respond, and the focus consultation discussions can happen. And that's called sprint POV. And your work papers, final reports remains the same. What we generally follow in your legacy, we can your RCMs or audit programs, etc. And your kind of a final report is similar, depends on the format, because it can be submitted to your audit committees or it can be submitted to your respective boards or stakeholders. That's remains the same. But only thing that time taken to doing the planning until the report finalizations is got reduced to using the IIA Agile audit life cycle. And there's some unofficial event, it's backlog refinement, because you have planned while at the time of planning might have an audit backlog of 25 items. You might have do a refinement because cannot be possible because what we expected is not happening here. So you can do some kind of a backlog refinement can be done. And this is generally happened in the Agile internet lifecycle. Project or canvas or audit canvas, if you want to say, it's kind of a concise document. That document links to your business objective and the project drivers, resourcing, time, and other consideration to align with the key stakeholder. It's basically that gives a perspective in terms of overall scheme of the process or the organization, how they are determined, how they are converted. There are two important terms which needs to be familiar. Is something called definition of ready, DOR. Definition of ready is nothing about where you define or obtain some kind of agreement with a key stakeholder on what story or scenario to be included in the audit, and the details what will be tested, what will be examined, and what will be reviewed on the goal of the work or the value to be delivered, right? And whether it's good to go for detailed review in the sprint, because definition of ready is out of 20 backlog items, 2 items going to do in a sprint one. Out of say backlog item 1 and 2, backlog item 1 is ready, backlog item 2 is not ready, then you have to do refinement that will be pushed into the next sprint. Because without definition of ready or without any documentations or the epic which you're going to focus is not ready, don't plan for any sprint activity, because that's a time check. Whereas in a legacy system, we do P2P audit, we jump into the risk and control, we might going to do a 40 or 50 control testings, right? Out of that, only 10 is ready. But what we know is we started spending time in terms of 50 items equally, which not going to happen. We're going to repeat our efforts once again, because once the documentation is coming. Whereas in the sprint world or the agile world, it is very clearly mandated only 5 or 10 items which is ready will be pushed towards that sprint for further examinations. And the next term is called the definition of done, the DOD. That's where they call it. Definition of done is it defines when story is completed, so that it's reached the satisfaction of your audit product owner and meets the objective of the audit. That's where definition of done. And then that's a level of assurance, or the set task is completed or the risk recommendation, all those angle has been taken care, which needs to be acknowledged by your product owner or your audit product owner. That's where the definition of done is coming into picture. These are the various jargons and terms that's been used in the Agile internal audit terms. As we practicing, we know what is in the legacy we followed, what are the changes we did. So this takes a moment of time to absorb and digest so that you can able to appreciate later. But I can assure this really workable, and it's working very well and saves a lot of time and effort. And what we spoke about, the better, faster, happier, 3 quotient, it's translated into the change of this life cycle which we have. Move on now. So next is, sorry. So next, if we want to pick up the overall, the framework of Agile internal audit, right? So previously we spoke about in terms of some terms, and what is the roles, what is my artifacts, what's my events will take place. If you want to translate this into a clear framework, which is to be start first, which has to go second. So sequentially, it has some sequential steps required. We spoke about the roles already. We spoke about the events of the ceremony already. Some of them unofficial event that we called it in the left, because the 4 events we spoke is a mandatory event. Unofficial event cannot be happen at the scheduled time. It can happen anytime. Then artifacts, we spoke about that all your audit canvas and what kind of a backlog refinement is happened. There are a few more artifacts has been included. For example, release plan and project backlog and implement list, burn down chart. Burn down chart is not been spoken earlier. Burn down chart is what is your effort you plan for this audit? What is the burn down is happened? What is remaining is there? So that you are clocking your effort and resources on time, so that it does not take you too much of your burn down. So that's on burn down chart. But it has some scientific method how the burn down chart has works. So these are the overall framework. If you started, it starts with your discovery or elaboration phase, where your audit executives or chief audit executives and the client stakeholders and customer users will gang up together along with your product owners to understand why we need to do this audit and what should be concludable area. What is the expectations of this audit from your product owner or the Scrum team. All those things will be have your thought processes so that they have a specific problem. It can be your leakages, it can be regulatory issues, it can be so there's some theme has been determined over here because there is a straight plan of your internal audit, what internal audit universe has to go, each area has been defined. But when this collaboration exercise happen within that area, if you want to pick it up as purchase to pay, what is my client problems, statements, what is my business stakeholder challenges, that where we do a discovery phase in relation to the area audit, which we're going to pick up. Might be an example of P2P. Within that, they're going to translate all the problem statement. That's what we call this discovery phase. So that we know that these are the real issues we need to face because business is the best person. They know that their own shop issues so that we can be able to fix it. That's very important activity. That translate into a roadmap or release plan. If you ask me the roadmap and release plan, what role has to do this activity? For example, after they got a briefing or the complete discovery has happened, your audit product owner come and going to talk with your Scrum Master, and it's going to come and talk with your to map it in terms of what is your product owner's what is your product owner's expectations in terms of the stakeholders been talking about it, and what is the Scrum Master to design. So that's what we called as a project backlog, project roadmap, and release plan. That's the way it's been designed. So we know the expectations and the theme must be determined from the stakeholders where the product owner will translate to your Scrum Master. Scrum Master is going to help you in terms of what is the overall backlog we need to plan, what is your roadmap to achieve that backlog, and what is should my release plan. This is what typically happen in the real practical world. Then that translate into sprint planning, whereas your Scrum Master and the Scrum team going to plan saying that this is expectation of stakeholder and the product owner. And then how to achieve that expectations and objectives is what they're going to do a sprint planning, which will be translate into sprint backlog, and that's where they're going to plan number of weeks the sprint has to happen. And duringly, there is a two parallel activity where the daily stand-up is happening, which we'll talk about. We spoke about earlier, like what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do today, and what are my impediments. Three important aspects has to be discussed mandatorily in the daily stand-up meeting or the daily scrum. It does not cross more than 15 minutes because that's a time check is there. All agile methodologies, it has a time check. It does not cross anything on that. So they have to fix it and close. There's no, it's not like your issue discussion with your team for translating. The three important questions has to be answered by the Scrum team, and it has to be put it in a board, storyboard, or a map which they create exclusive room for the Scrum team. Then it goes to the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. Sprint review we already covered because your Scrum Master and your product owner and audit champion and everyone going to discuss in terms of a sprint review and what is the completed story, what is my POV has to be submitted, and what's the feedback. Because during the sprint review, your client or their business stakeholder have open to give feedback whether they like or they doesn't agree that certain points which you have happened. Three things has to be ensured this is happening in the sprint review. Then it goes to sprint retrospective, which we told already in terms of what has to cover. So these are the general expectations in terms of what has to be covered in the overall framework. And if you move on towards the next slide, Varsha. We spoke about what are the roles in Agile internal audit, right? That's where you can see that audit product champion, audit product owners, Scrum Master, audit team, or the Scrum team. These are the four roles we spoke of. I'm just flashing you in terms of you can try to observe some keywords. The most important aspect in the Scrum world is it's a cross-functional team, because while we framing the Scrum team, you have to keep important aspects. For example, practical, I'll tell. It works very well in the advisory. It might works in the in-house team also. For example, if someone is doing, say, HR payroll process, and that person being very familiar across the industry, because HR payroll process, 80 to 90% of the process remains the same, or the expectations remains the same. Here and there, the tools and technologies or ERPs applications which they use, it's vary from customer to customer, so client to client. So largely they know the risk and the controls. Largely, they know that where the problem can occur, where that issue can reverse, right? So that person has to be used. For example, any of your agile internal audit, then you need to know that what's the key strength and skill set of the people. Then map that people in the Scrum team. For example, if you have five sprints, you're going to do it. And within the each sprint where you have a feel that these are my HR payroll audits are there, right? Then we need to bring those expertise towards the Scrum team so that that person able to translate the 2 weeks time within much faster because they know what's the best practices, what's the issues and rigor. They can quickly catch up the speed rather than any new person comes. So that's a better preferences, but still it's not applied because sometimes we know that the practical world is a lot of skill set, new people is joining, so they need some amount of time. But that's the way it stays. So that's what there is an important element of teaming which we talk about. It has to be the important skill set of people needs to be mapped so that you have a clear mandate in terms of that audit can or the agile audit can happen very fruitful and meaningful on this. And the most important next is on the stable, right? And one of the ground rules, you can't change the team just like that. And it needs to be same stable team. At least you can see that's an expectation, but in practical world, if you need some amount of we need to get over because they are real genuine reasons. But the recommended practices, you should keep the stable team. You can't change just like that unless the sprint is completed. At least don't change within the sprint or the expected skill set of the person who will be useful for that sprint. Then it's collaborated, which we talk about how the teams has to handle, how have to do testing. That's a very similar approach which we follow in the existing legacy mechanisms. So we'll move on to the next one. So we spoke about initially, we're going to pick up a 3 important segment. What are the changes that happen in the audit planning? That's the key changes we should be aware of it. And what are the changes in the fieldwork? What are the changes in my reporting? That's what we're going to cover up. So far, we covered in terms of what is Agile, why Agile has to come to internal audit, and what are the Agile internal audit life cycles, what are the rules, what are the events, overall framework of Agile. So that we know slightly, we get intense towards that the new terms and the new concept, right? Now we'll get into quickly comparison in terms of what is the changes going to happen in the audit planning, so that you can quickly appreciate that in terms of this is an important element of the changes where the Agile internal audit has been doing. So if you look, there are 6 items we mapped it. One is the overall in terms of Agile internal audit manifesto. Then there should be social contract, there should be audit canvas, and there should be a story mapping, and there should be a backlog items and user stories. So we heard some of these items in the previous slides and all. So, but I'll touch upon what is this all about. So if you look, Agile internal audit manifesto, that's a very important element where anyone looking for Agile internal audit implementations of a plan, they should have this manifesto in place. So manifesto is a symbol, right, where you have a declaration making that what I'm going to focus and what is my outcome. So not necessarily all manifesto is going to be standard across the organizations or across the audit. So you have to clearly carve out what is a declaration I'm going to make it for Agile internal audit. That has to be thoughtful in your discovery, or it has to be very thoughtful so that what I need to focus on, what is the outcome. That's a 2 important question has to be kept as a brainstorming session to get out of this one. But I'll tell 9 elements generally any Agile internal audit manifesto where each client or the business team has to create is more they talk about what is the outcome driven and going to expect it out of this Agile internal audit. It should be a just-in-time approach and does not fit for all, so that you should clearly mention like what has to be comes in the overall scheme of the Agile internal audit, how my teaming, how my structure, how my resources going to be deployed, what's the time frame I'm planning, what kind of investment has to be done, that has to be there. And then you have to mention that in the manifesto that it's going to be collaborative approach, where you're not going to ignore your business or the stakeholders on this, they're going to be part of the scheme. So that has to be there. And decision making as you go, that has to be one of the principle or element you need to follow, because you can't wait for the decision making. Decision must may happen as the go. So there's no waiting of time because Agile is move very faster on it. And then there's a continuous communication with stakeholders. That's the main element where you need to bring in the Agile manifesto. As what we're doing in the sprint review, within a 2 weeks, we are sharing an incremental output or outcome to the stakeholders. And similarly, we are having any project improvements, it has to be communicated by Scrum team or Scrum master to the product owner, and they have translated to the communication. So the communication quotient has been increased vastly in the Agile with your stakeholders. And the last element which you need to create in your manifesto should be a quick and ready to be an iterations, because you need to accept all the iterations. So that kind of adaptations is required in your manifesto. And second important element you need to declare is have to have and won't have. So have to have is nothing about your what is the key aspects of your internal audit function that cannot be sacrificed in executing this audit or this mandate. That's where you need to mention, I will not compromise certain things if during this audit. That has to be called out and agree as a team. That's what we call have to haves. And want to have is nothing about what are the aspects your internal audit function or the internal audit team strive towards that? What is that driving for that? That has to be mentioned, but it's not required to executing this matter, but this is what they're driving, so that you have a reality check while you're doing the sprint and check that are we moving towards those directions. This is what this Agile internal audit manifesto is important. Then agree your social contract. Social contract, nothing about you're setting the expectations for the logistics, for the behaviors and other factors. For example, logistics, what is the cadence for this project or this audit? And what are the core hours for the team? And when will the team have the daily stand-up meetings? And what are the roles for the team members? We know that in the framework, we know these are the roles, but we need to call out what role which person is going to play. And that has to be mentioned clearly so that the team is completely engaged and aware of what's happening on this entire audit. And who will schedule the events. So that clarity will have to be, as a social contract has to be signed off. And this has to be circulated within the Scrum team audit product owner champion so that they know this is what it clearly described in the social contract. And then there's a behavior, right? What are the norms and the value for the team members has to come, and who should the team, if the tool does not work within the outside the norms, who has to be escalated? All those things has to be clearly called out in the social contract so that it doesn't not the people should not say that, oh, they're not aware of this. That's all making a point of making a social contract. And what other aspects would like to team agree, right? All those things should be part of social contract, which is not in the legacy internal audit which we do. We might know, but it's not coming in the document. But this is one of our insisting in terms of making a social contract ready so that the team is aware of what they're supposed to do. And audit canvas might be small image, but I'll have a separate slide where you can see all the contents within the audit canvas. What are the questions to be asked so that is covered in your clear discovery phase or elaboration phase feature. But it's a set of questions to be discussed at the sprint is 0 level, where your business stakeholders and the product owners will discuss on why we're doing this audit. That's a typical questions at start. And it's drilling down further to identify that root or thread of the where the knot has been created, right? And that's one thing, but I'm not going to discuss in detail. I will move on, we'll ask about this. Then story mapping, right? It's a simple breakdown of your audit canvas. I know these are my questions. Within that, what are the auditable areas that's been concluded? Within the auditable area, we're going to determine into 4 segments. What is my epic? What is my feature in terms of how it's and what is my user story? Epic is nothing about a new term in Agile, which is your big picture level. What stakeholders looking for its future? That's the way Epic looks like. And feature is nothing about your grouping of user story. That's the feature. And user story is nothing about your actionable bite-sized pieces of the work. Basically, that concludable audit areas is what you need to do. Some kind of hypothesis or testing estimate plan. So if you want to keep a classic example, epic, for example, whether my access controls are compromised, that's my epic. The feature is nothing about within that access controls, what are my user stories? User story 1, whether my access is provided on the role basis or not. So user number story 2, what the SOD conflict is taken care and the periodic validation phase. This is my story. So while we story translate into POV, I need to respond towards the user story, how my access is provided to the people. It's a role-based or something. Towards that story, we need to collect all the information and we need to sell as a POV to their business stakeholders so that business will be able to understand the language which they have. But we also taking care of the risk angle while we evaluating this. That's a big change in the way the epic feature and user story is being articulated. And user story, there's some ground rules while you're creating a user stories. You should see it's a testable hypothesis that's considering some element of audit scope and which will relate to your point of view can be able to determine out of it, right? That's the way you should think. You should not create a user story which can't be testable, right? That's one important ground rule you should look. The second is the basic unit of work can be delivered in a single sprint. You have to create your user story, all the relevant user story within the same sprint. You can't create a user story when sprint 1, sprint 3, sprint 4, because then there's a kind of an effort go diluted because you need to revisit again the same areas of user stories again. And always captures that who, what, and why in the simple and concise manner within your story, so that you're able to break down exact expectations in the user story. Otherwise, the user story can't be completed all the times. That's where the most important. The hypothesis is nothing about your simple. What is my risk description? The risk of why the risk is coming to mitigate my control. How it can mitigate the control, and who is performing this control. That's the hypothesis. A description you should create it against the field in hypothesis field. And definition of ready, definition of done, we already spoke about, and that's where, and you can see some acceptance criteria, sizing estimation, owner, definition of done, ready. Definition of ready, we spoke about, definition of done is there. Acceptance criteria kind of an attributes in the old world, but the acceptance criteria, we're going to correlate and make the view from the business stakeholders in so that they're not going to challenge your acceptance criteria related. But that's one of the practices been following in this new agile interload. Sizing estimation, nothing about what's the size you picked up for this. So to determine your user story complete, that's a sizing estimation is there. Order is typically same. So this is a straightforward where the big change is happening. Audit backlog is very simple. It's a simple kind of an Excel sheet where, or if you're using Excel sheet, there's a tools in place for Agile also where you can see what are my audit backlog as sticky notes, and they push towards that what's going to be covered in sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3. So story mapping, if you want to take it, you can see that the epic feature and user story. That's the way it's you can see in the story mapping if you want to maximize that. So that epic, if we can correlate in our legacy world is level 1 processes and feature can be level 2, user story can be level 3 or testable area in a simple language, but it's not, as I said, as straightforward. Because when we're creating an epic feature and user story, it translates into business language, but translate into what my stakeholders are expecting has to be created in a user story. It's not like a straightforward like purchase to pay process, procurement, purchase order. It's not like that. You need to tell whether my purchase order is complied with all my policies or not. Then it's my purchase order is not being issued to some of unauthorized person. So that's the way we have to articulate in your user story. Whereas we have a clear taxonomy in the legacy internal audit. We have purchase to pay, then we have 20 items, which we call it in the risk and controls. That's a big shift in your agile internal audit. Move on. So I mentioned, if you can see, this is an example of your canvas, audit canvas. These are some questions which is available where you can ask every time in terms of what are the questions you need to populate. First example, if you can look at the middle if project drivers. I'll call it some of the example so that your thought process align towards that. Why this project important to the business, right? If that question's put down in the audit canvas, you're able to find out, okay, this is where the important element is coming in this overall, this particular area. Then why is this audit plan? What are the drivers for the risk assessment? What is going within the business? Because sometimes we don't know what's going in the business most of the times, right? So we have to put that's his question and capture like what is going on the business as a simple language so that anyone look the audit canvas able to understand is a full briefing document for them to understand completely. And what is the value add to the enterprise, right? What they're expecting value addition points over there, because this audit canvas has not been done silo. This has been discussed with your stakeholders, and you felt this within the discussion of the stakeholders with additional information on planning. This is happening at the sprint zero. My first 2 weeks goes on this audit canvas. That's the way this works. And what are we solving for? Because you have to pick up some of your pain point ARM or big problem statement from them. So those are the 5 items should be there in your audit canvas list. And what questions will be answered at the end of the review, right? You should visualize that what questions I should be going to answer at the end of this sprint or end of this audit. That questions has to be populated as a project drivers. And if you move on to second, right, value proposition, if you ask, what is the value of doing agile audit in this area, right? That's an important question, because not necessarily all the audits need to be agile audit, but some problematic area we're going to pick up. So we need to identify that what is the value of doing this, the agile audit, okay? The number of weeks is more, or I have a big trouble in my stakeholders not happy in this audit, so I have to do this agile audit. So these are the guidance which you want to populate it, but this has to be agree with your audit champion, product owner, and your stakeholders. Then we clearly know the value propositions coming on this. And if you move on to about the business, right? So if you do about the business, how does business area align towards a corporate strategy? What is my objective? What is my goals? And what are my business landscape? And what is my existing business metrics is there? And what are the risks to the business achieving this objective? So these are the some of about the business you're going to bring. And then similarly, you're going to bring your cross-functional impact. If you look at the cross-functional impact, what are my key IT systems in place? What are my changes of regulations aspect is? What are my compliances angle is there? What are my financial importing reporting angle is there? So all my cross-functional impact, we're going to narrow down and put it across. And similarly, your key stakeholder, project scope, system control log, audit timelines KPI, and who's a project team. So if you look, this is a simple, looks like a simple, but it's more powerful for us to look in terms of what is my audit canvas looks like. So the big change is the planning is doing differently. So what remains the same? Your audit universe, auditable units is still there. It remains the same, because you have to do some identity assessment and you have to find which areas to be in scope, which is out scope, etc. From there, if you look within that, we know that 15 or 20 audit universe are going to pick up. Within that one universe, which is agile internal audit, which is traditional audit. If I'm going to pick up agile internal audit, from there, your planning and discovery phase started. This audit canvas document has to be populated at the sprint 0 level. So this is a kind of a big picture approach, and it gives a lot of insights for the team so that they know which angle or direction they have to identify while they executing this sprint. And that's a big important change that's coming. If you move on to next version. So we saw what are the changes in the planning. Now we have to see what changes is coming in the field, right? So if we spoke about in terms of your sprint planning, right? So don't plan anything in the silos, because sprint planning should be done by the entire team. So, and don't spend too much on your estimating or planning the features which you don't understand fully, or if you're willing to take them or later, right? So these are some of your caution items you need to factor in your sprint planning. And don't commit to the user story that you are not clear. Some network issues was triggered. Sorry for that. I think you guys are able to see the sprint planning, where you guys are lost me.
Yes, Vetri, this from the slide only. You have started about sprint planning.
Yeah. I'll repeat some of our practical scenarios where many people making sprint plan wrong is, because generally they plan in silos, the sprint planning, but it has to be done by the entire team. And some of the caution items are, don't spend too much on your estimation or planning features of which do not understand fully by you, because feature items which you spoke about, epic feature, right? If some of the features can't be testable, can't be concluded within the sprint 1 and 2, because we know there's a problem is there, don't plan those sprint items within the sprint planning sheet. So we have to ignore that. And also don't commit to the user story that you are not clear about it, right? Because sometimes they know in legacy HR payroll process, this is the way my talent policy looks like, this is my HR requirement for process works well, and this is what my central operations teams in HR operations works like. Based on some assumptions and conclusion, we started doing it, but that's not the case in the sprint planning activity. So sprint planning in general, it's a 2-hour event for any 1 week sprint. Otherwise, it's a 4-hour event for 2-week sprint. Because there's a quality 4-hour time has to be invested in terms of what we're going to do in this sprint. What are the user story we're going to develop? What are the features we are targeting in the overall audit backlogs which we planned? And that sprint planning outcome of that, it will move on to the sprint backlog, and that will make it into how many sprints we need to cover up on this. That's a whole exercise we do. So how it works in real world, from the audit backlogs, items will be picked up to the sprint backlog. Based on the priority, where my audit owner got the information stakeholder, I will move around my priority items in the sprint planning backlog. That's the way it works. The sequence is audit backlog, then sprint backlog. The sprint backlog prioritization happen based on the stakeholder prioritizations. Because in any of your audits, as we move around for the 10 sprint, what the expectations from the stakeholder, they've been seriously focusing on your your revenue items, basically how my collections looks like, and whether my collections have something is compromised in the policy. Then that's my first priority. Then so you need to plan your priority items, because we are aligned towards the stakeholders, because they get the happy question more faster, because they got the responses from my internal audit team, because that's an independent team. They expect us to give a feedback about the organization, where the risk and control works around, what are the issues triggered. So in the sprint planning, that's what we created an audit backlog, sprint backlog. Between this, your audit product owner have a conversation with your stakeholder, identify what's the priority of the business or the clients. Based on that, your sprint backlogs is determined. That's a big change in the way we're executing internal audit on this. And the team will communicate to the audit product owner what is being can be delivered, how it can be done. Sometimes it's a collaborative approach we spoke about, right? It's not about what the client expects you can do. Sometimes those priority cannot be delivered because the information availability missing, or the process cannot be understood fully because within the first 2 weeks of time. So what's this? The team will communicate to audit product owner saying that this item cannot be bring it in the sprint 1 or 2 because so and so reasons. So that's where your stakeholder opinions or the expectations put across, and your team's availability or the capacity or what they can do is also being factored in this sprint plan. This is a two-way processes. It's not a one-way. And some Scrum Masters should ensure the team understand its purpose and watch out the time, because that's the role of a Scrum Master, because your Scrum team working towards objective of the stakeholders, your product owners translate the expectations to the Scrum team, your Scrum Masters, the independent team, watch out the time box. So time is not exceeded what is expected. That's the way we are able to translate your outcomes or the products or outputs to the stakeholders. This is a big change in the way the sprint planning is being done. And why we need to do this, of course, right? Making alignment within the group. The group which I talk about, client as well as the own team, right? That's where they are very clear in terms of they agree clearly, this is what they have to deliver. And the stakeholders also aware that this is what I'm going to expect it out of sprint one. So they also kept us an awareness towards that. That's the big importance of sprint planning. Yeah, sure. Let's move on. So we spoke about story mapping, right? Or the way generally we work is there's a visual display is required, because there's a lot of jargons, a lot of terms being used. How in real world this Agile Internal Audit works is ideally they have an exclusive room for the Agile Internal Audit team. They have a sticky notes in terms of where to place this sprint and audit. There's a kind of a board which will give a team board generally, right? What will happen? They have a two different pillars or a column saying that what are my items in the audit backlog, what are the items in the sprint backlog, what is in progress, what is blocked, what is definition of done. We spoke about definition of done, so that the Scrum team and in presence of a Scrum Master and audit product owner, what they do is they move the sticky notes. For example, sticky notes in the real world is, as we spoke about, one of your sprint backlog item is whether my user access is compromised, user access, right? That's one of my epic and the features we spoke about. Within that, we have some user story, how my access has been given is a role based on what kind of validation. That's one of my user story. That user story sticky notes will be in your audit backlog, and it will move on to sprint 1, sprint 2 backlog as and when they picked up as a priority. Then once they know that what is happening this week's sprint might be 2 or 3 items, right? Depends on how many the team size is working on that each sprint, right? So they know that this is my in progress item for this week. So that entire team, or the Scrum team, is focusing only that in progress item, so that they not focusing that multiple things at the same time. As we speak in the initial, right, Agile will go one at a time. They limit the work in progresses. They go as a small. So in the overall visualization board, they know clearly that focused items, so that every rest of the items should not be focused, so that they have a clear 100% focus as attention span is given to the focused item. And the blocked is nothing but a definition of ready, right? If something is ready, that will be moved towards that. Those items will be picked up by the team. For that's an area where we need to focus as an entire Scrum team and get it done in the next 2 weeks. Whereas in the traditional world, what we do, everyone started doing their work, and one person started HR payroll process, one person started P2P processes. What will happen, like too many things at the same time? Ultimately, nothing will happen because you have a dependency with your clients or your business stakeholder. Without the information, nothing can be done. What is not visible to the audit product owners or your Scrum Master, what is the exact working item is moving around, right? That's a big challenge. That's what's causing a lot of delay, because first few weeks or maximum 4 to 5 weeks is cost only on dependency or chasing the data. Whereas it's uneliminated, or it's uneliminated item in the past. What's happening in Agile world is those things is ignored. So team is not putting their resources or time towards that. They know this is not available, that the resources has been freed up towards the next Scrum item. That's the whole way your product owner, Scrum Master, Scrum team making effort towards that. What is ready, that will be focused and put across for the sprint, and those items will be go in detail for the definition of time. That's an important change, a big change. We spoke about earlier, like multiple weeks is taken for internal audit, right? That is eliminated towards this change. So I'm just flashing this how it looks like your visualization display looks like. That's the whole here. I shall move on to next. Yeah. One of our unofficial event we spoke about called backlog refinement, right? Because Agile principles come with iterations, and we have to adapt or respond towards a change. And we have a clear structure and systematic approach, so that what are the items cannot be done, we push back to the backlog, so that the prioritization is clearly focused to the item. Because many times in the ground, people focus not aligned towards the same. What is my product owners? What is my executing team? And what is my stakeholder? The 3 stakeholders have their different wavelength in terms of their understandings. So this backlog refinement will clearly told by the product owner, saying that this 10 items can't be done because I have a data dependency, or the process is not clear, or my stakeholder is not clear. So that's completely moved out of the visibility of the team. So they say, don't focus on this. So the entire focus as a team by stakeholder and you is getting clarity on the backlog refinement, where you know these are my backlog items, and this has to be refined towards exactly move towards a sprint 2 or 3, or move towards again a product backlog can be done. But it's a typically we call out of scope, right? So that there is a clear communications to the stakeholder, and the team is also in the same page. That's a big important exercise or important change which has happened in the Agile world or Agile internal audit world, a backlog refinement. That's most important. And one question. So we spoke about changes in your planning, changes in the field, right? And now we need to come to a stage of reporting, because these are the key changes happening. The way that point of view has to be delivered or has to be released to your stakeholders, right? So there's a nomenclature we discuss about each work product end of second week is called as a POV. What I did for the entire first week and second week has to be translated into POV. POV means again not like what we did as status reporting. Okay, these are the area we audited. This is a data dependency. This is a smart started. That's not the POV. The POV is more about your work product, which is measurable, which is has to be looked at by your stakeholders, saying that because that's a value for them, right? And what's happening on the ground at the administrative aspect or chasing a discussion, agreement, disagreement is fine. But what's important for them is to know about what is your point of view as your internal audit or internal audit professional. What are you going to communicate to me, my business? What are the changes that has to be done? What is a critical item that's has to come in the POV? So how it has to started on the sprint review. This happened in the sprint review event, where you need to do a 30-second elevator speech in terms of what you guys have looked up, what is your epic, what is your feature, what are the user story. That's give us some summary. And also you need to tell them based on your audit canvas, you need to tell this is your strategy, this is your objective, this is your goal. Tie back to your strategy, because while you explaining to the business stakeholder, they know because they can understand the business angle. So while you touch upon, you should tell that this is what you expected out of your strategy and your goals. When we look this is what I can correlate and tie back to your strategy. And then obviously you have to give the factual opinion in terms of are you saying exactly as a problem because of some root causes of system deficiency or the lack of control, or there's a genuine human error. There should be factually correct, right? That has to be communicated, whatever the user story. For example, same of access control, which we picked up, right? So what do you look at in terms of how the access control is being gathered? It's a role-based access, it's not role-based access. What are my architecture looks like there? And what are my validations been done before I've been granting some access to the people? What kind of a mapping is done? Whether my SOD has been defined for the roles. So you touch upon that, what you looked at in that, so that they know that this is what you evaluated when you're saying that factually opinion of the current state. And then the insights, right? What the most important element, the last element which they expect you to give the insight, are you saying fine or not fine? Because that's has to be communicated. Sometimes not necessary, it's only the exceptions goes to the POV, even that the positive things is goes to the POV, saying that there's no issues also, because that's a user story they expected out of you. So you need to go back and say the insights, because most of your business, they feel it's a problem, but when you do a complete study, it might not be a problem. And that has to be translated as insights to them. If there is a risk or the exposure, if there's no risk also, we should say that when we look, these are the angles, there's no risk is reported on this. And if you look the POV, right, some element or influencer, you should add it in the POV, because these are the basic expectations from the POV while drafting it. But there's an external aspects you can correlate, whether there's a threat or a competition or the benchmarking needs to be done. Because if they are looking at access control, what is the benchmarking? What's other people doing the role-based accesses? What are the other aspects is there? That's also can give us an external aspects, so that that's give a value additions for them to think through it, whether they need to make some changes on this, and some value drivers like the time spent and their output. There's any cost optimizing, how cost optimization angle can be added. That's the value drivers, the expectation system, and the technology, whether this process needs to be automated or some kind of digital solutions. Because the initial expectations come to know whether my access rights is compromised, but you can bring some validation in terms of what is the technological element can be added, because automation can there's a lot of significant time, right? Like what kind of a snapshot or dashboards we need to look, and the data sources, because most important aspect is the most of the organization they're looking at the data quality, the data sources, and availability and structure. So you need to touch upon in terms of data source, availability and quality also, and the business priority handles. While we narrating the POV, all the aspects which we spoke has to be there, so that it gives a 360-degree to your business stakeholders or your clients. That's the most important aspects, what has to go in the POV. And if you look in terms of, there are two approaches in your POV, the way you need to draft your POV. So one is your step back approach, top down. One is on the bottom up approach. The step back approach is Either you can start with the flow of your business strategy, business objective, or business objective, how it's been translated into objective. That's a flow of conversation. Or you can go back with your bottom up in terms of you start with there is any trend or exceptions or positive exceptions has been there, and what are the findings are there. Then how that findings are related to a hypothesis, and how this makes into you in terms of impact to your business. That's a way of approach. There's two approach you can pick it up while you narrating your POE to the business in the sprint review. This is an important way because traditionally we'll go with a straightforward internal audit observation with the risk rating, and we'll say directly jump into an exceptions and saying this is an exception, root cause, and the recommendations. Whereas here in the POE approach or model in Agile internal audit, you touch upon all the business angles, and you touch upon the external factors, and I also touch upon their strategy and objectives, so that it's give a complete story to the business stakeholder. They feel that someone coming like an external means an external internal auditor or the independent internal audit team and talk about their businesses. This gives a complete visibility for them to take, okay, where we should look, because always a business runs for the business, whereas they get some kind of feedback or opinion, they make a different change in the way they are to look their business. So that's a big change in the reporting angle if you look the Agile internal audit for the POV. Go back, Varsha, for the next slide. So we spoke about sprint review, right? The sprint review, it has to be done with business in the 2-hour event. It's generally what has to be discussed in the sprint review. The Scrum team has to present the point of view in front of a stakeholder, the business stakeholder, in front of your audit champion, which is we talk about what's the audit champion's role about, and your product owner, and the Scrum Master will be part of it. So this is an important event has to be there. You need to call out what was observed, understand and the facts, and what was the ground we are saying about it, right? That's the very important. It needs to be translated. And if the stakeholders not agreeing, because I ought to tell the typical, most of the cases, there'll be some pushback. They might not agree because they have to factor that the leadership team, mostly the stakeholders, we're talking about the decision makers who are the owner of the business or the owner of a particular vertical, right? They should be the part of the discussion. Sometimes they have to take a decision. Sometimes they have to factor in the opinions from the other stakeholders level. So that's time they might try to push back. If that's happened, you have to push that particular user story back to your sprint backlog or audit backlog refinement. So something it's not generally happen because while we rolling out Agile internal audit, you have to educate your business team that the expectation of the business team has to conclude your acceptance or disagreement on the same meeting. There's no time taken to go back and check approach. And that's important awareness you have to create with your business stakeholders. It's not a status update meeting. It's not a general deck we do because it's a POE, what we saw in the earlier that has to be presented. What I'm talking about, the event methodology or the customs has to be followed over here. And the Scrum Master responsible to ensure that the event takes place and discussion completed within the time expected. Generally, they do within 1 hour to us. That's the maximum time they're given for this sprint review. And that's important aspects where you need to keep that what are the grounded rules for the sprint review. Can you move on to next slide, Roshan? So one more event we call sprint retrospective, which normally not happening in some organization. They may discuss at end of the project or audit, how they performed, what is they missed out, what they should have done better. That's the way generally, but officially they call it as a sprint retrospective, and this is a 1 hour event. Is your Scrum Master, product owner, and a Scrum team. So what they do here is basically there is a 4 L's is there. What they like means the things that you have enjoyed in this audit or enjoyed in this particular sprint, or that's what they have to do. This has to be done at end of each sprint. So that's where we call this as a review, right? As you might have initially seen, Each sprint as a planning, each sprint as a field work, which is a sprint review. There's a retrospective is also available in the sprint. So that retrospective gives a kind of indication. It's not your general work paper review. It's as a more in terms of macro level review. The work paper level review is done by the Scrum Master. That's what they can do, one level of review, but ultimately the product owners decides the work products. So that's one important aspect you should make sure of it. And the next L is more about what you learn, or basically what you learned out of this sprint. That's where the team or the Scrum team should have narrated in the overall 1 hour discussion they should tell. So it's a collectively, as in the storyboard, they have to go and map it, saying that what they like, what they learned about it, what is they lagging about in the sprint, and what did they long for it. That's also should be mentioned. So this gives a clear indication for the Scrum Master and the team that where they're moving towards needles towards that, right? That's the whole idea of this sprint retrospective. It helps a lot of teaming, bonding has been created, and they work towards a team effort towards the next sprint. So that's a translate clearly that open communications is being happened as a Scrum team. Next version, this one. Okay, if you want quickly a summary of differences, right? What are the similarity? What's needs? If I put across in simple word, what is different? What is the same? What do we need to do from you, right? So what does not change? What is remains the same? I'll talk about. It's the same as we're going to issue an audit report. But the audit report is breakdown into small pieces as a POV. The final output going to the client and the stakeholders remains the same, but it's consolidated. All POV is going to be translated into final report, and it's a risk-based focus. It's not like something different. That remains the same. And we have the same objective or professional skepticism as independence remains the same. That's not changed. What is different is happening is we have a point POV is going to be delivered. That's a difference. One difference. Second difference, there is an increased transparency has been there because you are frequently engaging your stakeholders in terms of keeping them aware, and there's a lot of interactions happening within the team. Because most of the times in the audits in the traditional waterfall method, there will be a lot of initial discussions happen within the product owner and the team, whereas that's got diluted in middle. They'll come back again during the report finalization phase. So in middle, they get lost or they might go in different direction by different team. So what has happened, a big changes, they're putting across a team together and working towards a common objective so that they are on the same wavelength is happening. That's increase the transparency is happening. And largely the frequent engagement is happening and they get timely responses. And the most important, we spoke about initially, every 2 weeks, we know something, we're giving some validation to the client or your business stakeholders. So they get happy about something is I'm getting input or validation from my internal audit team. So they start moving faster towards quick actions towards that. So this is what are the difference? This is a quick summary of differences there. And what do you need? From US? Basically, you have to create the awareness about this Agile mechanism for your client side as well as business stakeholder. Because if you're changing the methodology or the way you're going to execute it, because there is some kind of your client or stakeholder should be part of this event and roles. So they should play the roles or the events appropriately. So there's some kind of advocacy or awareness to be done. And you need to support your teams basically in terms of this if they pick up for the transition from a traditional waterfall to Agile. So there's some amount of learnings, unlearnings has to be done. So that's the support is really required for this. And the candid feedback, because in general legacy or traditional audit, sometimes the feedback happening, sometimes it never happen. Here we put a clear structure and systematic as each event has to take place, and hence we call this as candid feedback is happening in this sprint retrospective and recorded as a formal event so that they know really this is what they're lacking for it, right? So that's important differences of similarities is coming around it. And what is expected outcome? Very simple, because they improve the engagement stakeholders and the clear focuses comes and prioritizations comes. There is a reduced lot of waste and time, so that if some item is not ready, they push back to the audit backlog so that those items is not being focused or idle time can be saved. And this is the simple summary of what's the difference is happening. Or should I just move on to the next? So if you look from the IIA standards, whether this Agile internal audit methodology, it's in line with IIA standard, if you ask me, yes, most of the cases. Because if you look the purpose or authority or responsibility, right, that particular section talks about more about the charter of IIA, right? It does not charter talk about with methodology, because end of the day, I have to ensure that that expected outcomes and the risk formality, risk, the way it has been engaged, everything is being covered. So that the charter of the IIA functions, the overall objective of internal audit or the manual remains the same. It's just changing your approach in terms of your execution, the methodology. Independent subjectivity, yes, still Agile has a lot of collaboration effort with the customer, but still they're going to be independent and they focus on the objective. It's more about interactions, or they keep them aware, and they also bring them in terms of, because they know much better in terms of what's happening in their world, so that we bring on board it, but we still be independent towards the expected output or work has to be delivered. Proficiency and the due professional care, yes, there is a clear structure, systematic events, so many events and the terms has been used. So there's a professional due care has been given, because they put across the backlogs, audit backlogs, sprint review, retrospective, and the POE has been, the PO is very exhaustive than the normal internal audit. So report, so it gives a lot of efforts on that. The quality assurance and improvement program, it's kind of a self-assessment, right? If you look at the quality assurance, the audit program, audit product owner going to review their work papers, and a Scrum Master can do the work papers one level review if it's required. So that gives some kind of a quality assurance what is being translated, what's coming in the output, and your stakeholders also acknowledging the fact is there, because that's an end user who was part of it. So the nature of work is very simple, and the monitoring progress is happening in the Agile internal audit, because you have a transparent storyboard happening in the room, and there's a tools of Agile is also there, so that can really know the status of where the Agile internal audit, or the which user story is pending, which is definition of plan, which is ready for sprint. All those aspects has been there, and that's a whole. If you look at the IIA standard compliance, and we should just move on to the next one. So where do we start, right? Now we need to, if someone interested towards Agile internal audit, right? Where the journey has to start, right? What are the sequential steps is required? Which has to take first, which has to go next. There's a kind of sequential mapping is being done. If someone is interested towards the Agile internal audit, right? They need to have a clear Agile internal audit lab session. It's generally 4-hour session where you need to look the potential of where you can bring Agile internal audit as a stakeholders, as internal audit function, and the business stakeholders. Sometimes not required, because internal audit stakeholders has to identify that what are the problem statement, what the business is looking of them, so that they will factor those problem statements in the lab sessions, and they see what can be an Agile internal audit can bring. It's again, they decide about pilots. Basically, this is a big methodology, right? They need to get appreciated whether it's really working or not. They have to pick up some pilot projects and see how am I able to save my time during the traditional audit and during my Agile internal audit, whether my 16 weeks comes to 8 weeks or my 16 weeks go into 24 weeks. So that's the where the pilot audits is important. And the next step in the overall transformation journey is they have to pick up Agile internal audit training, because what we spoke about, the high level, macro level concept, within that, each one, they have that the operating models that they have to do certain things in different way. So they need at least 1.5 days or 2 days full-fledged programs for the pilot team who's going to do a pilot Agile audit, so that they get familiarized or practicing that Scrum, the POE, how to write the POE, what the role play have to do in the daily Scrum. So that shift is happening between the legacy towards Agile. So that's this full day, 1.5 day or 2 day program, make them to familiar in some kind of hands-on experiences required. Then coach the coaching is to be done. Next is coaching about your pilot team, because we spoke about the different roles. There's one more role required. Since this is a completely a new scheme of world, at least they need at least 6 months to 1 year to completely digest and absorb the new concept. What is an important element is there's a new role called Agile coach. So this Agile coach is someone who's familiar in this Agile internal audit. They've been practicing in the past. They'll come as an independent person to, after 2 days training, they can't be a full-fledged Agile internal auditor. They can go and they do on the word. It's not happened. They need some amount of 2 months to 3 months of coaching so that they can correct their understandings in terms of while they're executing Agile internal audit. So the pilot team requires some amount of coaching for the 2-3 months to get some hand holding. That's what you can see many of them. There's Agile coach. The role has been popular in the market where most of the organization engaging Agile coach for some moment of settling time has happened towards their understanding towards Agile internal audit. If you look, there's a lot of Scrum Masters, a lot of professional Scrum Masters, so there are a lot of audit programs, pro certifications are there, and there's a Agile leadership certifications also happen. And there's something called Agile coaching certifications. So those people is really required for them to really handle these people for first few months of, so that they start practicing their understandings. What is in the theoretical or what is the terms we use that comes to practical worlds and hands-on experience. And then the last big of your transformation journey picked up. What they have to step back and relook the overall is from my lab session towards my coaching, what I learned so far, what's the real potential in Agile internal audit. Those pilot audits and the parallel traditional audit, what's the big differences coming in my outcome? What are my validations coming in Agile? That's where your chief audit executives or your leadership team of internal audit has to relook and understand this as a complete business case in terms of really this Agile internal audit making impact. Then they go for a transformation journey. This transformation journey, generally, it takes around 6 months to 2 years, depends on the number of audits and the number of auditors within your organizations. Because if someone is having 300 auditors, then it's a huge transformation journey. They have to go sequentially, which area, which region, which locations are basically needs to cover. So this is a roadmap towards if someone going to adopt an Agile internal audit mechanisms in their world. So this all about the transformation journey, so that it gives some kind of a yardstick if someone thinking through about Agile audit, it gives this kind of a perspective for them to where to start, how to start. And with that, I also have a time block, so I completed what I promised. So last 10 minutes we can open for Q&A. Partha, any questions?
I am just checking on the chat box, Vetri.
Okay, can we do weekly sprint in case of requirement totality? Yes. So sprint is minimum a week or 2 weeks, but it does not cross more than 2 weeks. Someone is doing a sprint for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that's not acceptable. Each sprint should be a minimum of 1 week or maximum of 2 weeks.
Next question is there a tool like Jira Configure to manage the backlog and sprints for Agile audits?
Yes, there is a tools in the market. To start with, you have to do a manual exercise to get the teams comfortable to about the terms in terms of what is my Scrum Master role, what is my Scrum team role, what is my product owner role, what is I have to put in the backlog, what I put it in the daily Scrum. So once they get a complete hang of it, they can go for a tool, because whatever we talk about, everything is already there in the tool, which just navigate you the methodology in terms of the terms and etc. is coming in the tool.
Yes, we have another question. Isn't the sprint planning meeting limited picking up items from the backlog and putting into sprint backlog based on sprint point estimation?
Isn't the sprint planning meeting limited picking the items from the backlog and putting into sprint backlog based on sprint point estimation? Yes. In sprint planning, all purposes, they have to look which are the definition of ready, right? So among my items, certain items are ready items. I picked up But again, it has a two-way. While I'm picking a sprint items, I have to factor that what is my stakeholders' expectations. For example, there are 10 items out of definition of ready is done. Out of 10, but my stakeholder expecting first two items within the sprint audit backlog, they want to pick it on priority. Then that has to go on a first priority in the upcoming sprint. Because this is a collaborative approach where my team is saying this is ready to go because they got all the information or the acceptance or they have clearly understood from the team perspective or the internal auditor perspective. Whereas my stakeholders in the business saying that this is my prioritization, I want to hear from you the first feedback about, because they might go from digital journey or digital transformation, or they might thinking about expanding their business areas, or they're looking to fix some kind of leakages which we are not aware, which they are aware. So they want to get that independent view. So that's why the collaborative approach, the sprint planning has to be picked up from that items from the backlog. And within the backlog, something is ready for that only. We can't pick it up every items. Something's ready. We call the definition of ready some certain parameters as we speak initially. If that's satisfy all the parameters, and it's obviously it's a ready item for the sprint.
And we have the next question. Is the reporting restricted to POV alone, or overall POV or overall report would be given at the end, consolidating all POV?
POV is the incremental release where I'm keep my stakeholders aware of what is my point of view in your auditable areas. All the consolidated POV, we're going to give a final report, which traditionally we give a final internal audit report. That's a consolidated POV goes as a final single report for the stakeholders, all the audit sponsor. And for audit committees, they're going to pick up the items in the audit committees, how they want to present it, that they can do it. That remains the same.
Yes, Vitri, I think that was the last question. We have somebody named Padmanabhan Krishnan raise a hand, so not sure if he has a question from his end.
There's one more question. Being a Scrum product owner, I found okay, this is an appreciation.
Yeah, that was the last question, Vetri.
Okay.
All the participants are allowed to talk. They can unmute themselves and raise questions.
Okay. So that was it from the chat box. So I think it's open for participants to unmute themselves and ask questions.
Hi, this is Vijay. So my question is, how do you kind of maintain the independence if the Scrum is talking about very closely working with all of the stakeholders through the audit process?
So you can be a bit. Yeah.
So my question is, how do you maintain independence through the process of audit in a Scrum environment when you kind of closely work with stakeholders throughout the process? Does that not hamper the independence of the audit function?
So if you look the overall this new methodology, right? If we talk about, we've been telling customer to be or the stakeholder to be part of it, but there is a line on this very clearly. When we say independence, they will tell that what is a problem statement. They will tell what needs to be priority. But again, I think you might catch hold of it while the sprint planning. The team decides that it's acceptable for them to go ahead for the definition of ready, right? They have their own standard in terms of, okay, this, whatever they explain to us is clear and it makes very sense to us, or they are going to accept it. And second is, it's completely independent. There's no question of independence is compromised. Where we engage in them is at the time of prioritization, we engage in them at the time of what is happening in their world and what they expected out of this. And in the sprint review also, we're going to independently give our point of view. They're going to accept it or reject it. It's up to them. But we're not going to say that if they're not accepting also, we're not going and saying that, okay, we are not going to issue the report just like that and want to change whatever the customer is saying, because we have a clear independence in the observations, presentations, etc. During the planning, even the execution and the reporting. So independence is still open. Nothing has been compromised over here.
I have a question here. Rukmini here. See, when I was applying these principles of Scrum and Agile during my, when I was leading these audits, I was playing the role of champion, and I had a person reporting on to me who was playing Scrum Master.
Mhm.
Suddenly, the Scrum Master went out of this, and I was forced to play the role of Scrum Master to ensure that the work gets done and I deliver. I found that I just couldn't manage to play the champion's role effectively at all. Just having a Scrum Master, is it not possible to take the work to completion, even for a short tenure?
See, one important aspect of my here is the roles cannot be swapped, or you can double hatting the role. That's one grounded rule. If you are playing a role of audit champion, you can't take additionally a Scrum Master for the same project. You can take it for other different audits, but you can't do the same audits where you're playing a role of Scrum Master and champion. Then you can't do justice to the champion on the neither the Scrum Master. That's not accepted in the Agile principles, as we see in the fundamentals of principles of Agile, how they structure it. And that's where you're not able to appreciate, I can't play the role of Scrum Master because too much of pressure. There's an independence between the audit champion. Audit champion comes at the beginning and audit champion comes at the sprint review. In between, they work closely with the product owner and the Scrum Master is working together, right? So that's a big, I think there's a mistake can happen, might be some genuine reasons because of people not there.
Yeah.
Engage.
So it just doesn't work. Even by definition, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that gives me some kind of comfort. Okay. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Vit.
Okay. Any other questions, Varsha?
We have not got any on the chat box or the Q&A section.
Okay.
And if we have no other questions, I think we are on time as well.
I did 2 hours job.
Yes, on dot.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy to take any questions offline. If you wish to connect with me, you can drop a note, and with IIA chapter, Madras chapter, they can pass on those questions also, and able to resolve your clarity around your questions. Thanks a lot. Being patient with me for the last 2 hours. Thanks a lot for everyone.
And thank you so much, Vetri. This session was very insightful and there were a lot of key takeaways. Thank you so much for your time as well. Thanks, audience, for joining.
Thanks, IIA, for arranging this.